and I'm your host today on this new show, Close the Distance, which is being re-released in 2022. And I've got some co-conspirators here to help me pull that off. I see we've got a few folks joining the webinar side of this, and you probably are seeing me on YouTube as well. Although, look at that, I'm streaming to the wrong YouTube account, which kind of figures. But that's all right. So my name again is Eric Johnson. I'm your host here for Close the Distance. I'm joined by my very close friends, Eric Garland and Monica Nixon, who I'll be introducing you to here in just one second. But first, I want to tell you a little bit of background about what this is for. The pandemic struck in March of 2020. And when that happened, I called my kid brother, Derek, who's CEO of the company I started in 1995. And I said, we've got to reorganize the company. And you're in charge of the software and the consulting and research businesses. I'm going to take everything else and go figure out what to do about this whole situation. And so Aurora had a mitosis event, essentially, where I stripped off a few leaders and operators from the main hive. Aurora WDC continued into the pandemic relatively unchanged. And then I went off and started a new thing called Stochasm Studios, which went on to produce several hundred online events for clients of all kinds over the next 18 months or so. And that was about 18, 19 months back. Since then, I've met a whole bunch of people I never would have expected meeting. And it has been the pandemic for me has been a tremendous opportunity. Even though I haven't left this chair much in the last year and a half, I am excited for what 2022 brings. And my co-conspirators and I here are in the process of relaunching this. One of the things that Stochasm Studios produced in the summer of 2020 was for a group called the Regional Leadership Council here in the state of Wisconsin. And it was a series of webinars together with that 9-region group of economic development professionals. And we had several thousand people attend those webinars over the course of last summer. Year ago last summer. And that's really where Close the Distance came from. The chief participants in that were Aurora's Chief Analytics and Learning Officer, Dr. Craig Fleischer, who had a piece called Winners, Losers, and Why. And working alongside him, by the way, was Mr. Graham Goodweiler, who is now the program manager for SRC Analytics, which I'll tell you more about here shortly in Aurora WDC's new infrastructure. And those two guys really work well together. They're really the analytic cornerstone of what Aurora is all about. And I'll tell you more about that here in a second as well. But during that process, we also introduced a guy named David Conley. Dave Conley, and Eric, I think you know Dave. I don't know if Monica does or not, but Dave's one of the smartest people I know, and we recruited him as my fractional chief innovation officer at Aurora. And he did a piece called Creative Destruction, where we basically used the trends of engineering system evolution, otherwise known as S-curve analysis, to predict how the future of different technology and business system evolutionary stages were going to unfold in the months ahead. And that was just such a fascinating experience. I was also privileged to bring in usually a CEO or two from different organizations around the state. I had the CEO of the Green Bay Packers appeared, the CEO of the Culver's restaurant chain appeared, the CEO of I just blanked. I won't say since I forgot about him. But we had many chief executive officers from Wisconsin brands who appeared on that series. And we talked a lot about their expectations for the future. And so my great promise to myself at the end of the last year, end of 2020, I promised myself that in 2021, I was going to bring Close the Distance back somehow. And Monica and Eric, you are helping me fulfill my biggest promise to myself, which was to get this show back on the road and figure out what the future looks like. And so for the next several days, Monica and Eric are going to help me explore the macro environment of 2022. What does the macro environment look like for us? And the reason I invited Monica and Eric specifically was because they have the right mindset. they have the right attitude, and they have the right culture of analytic inquiry in order for us to do this productively. And I think that's a big part of what I want Close the Distance to become. Is I want it to be an example of what the analytic mindset really means. And I was just talking with my Scrum team this morning. We have a Tuesday morning Scrum that goes for about an hour in advance of this. And we were talking very closely about what that means. And it has two key characteristics that you'll discover here with us. One is the ability to admit when you're wrong, to retract your mistakes and correct yourself. That's a very important part of being an elite technical operator in the analytic domain, otherwise known as the ambiguous sciences, which we'll be studying here going forward. The second characteristic is the ability to say, I don't know, to admit when you do not have the answer. And the American culture today, I think, has become intoxicated by certainty. We have become so drunk on the notion that we have to be both sure of ourselves and right, that it's almost impossible for people to operate in an actually confident way. So with that, one of the things we're going to be showing you here in the months ahead, and I've got to figure out where I put it now and share this on the screen. This will be, here we go. Hopefully y'all can see this. This is what we are going to be consuming our next several days with, is the discovery process. And discovery is where I sort of think of traditional strategic market and competitive intelligence and what it's for. It's really the mission definition of what strategic market and competitive intelligence is all about. Discovery is about putting boundaries around your macro environment by understanding who the stakeholders are in that macro environment and what their issues are, and then understanding the lay of the land or the landscape and what the trends are that are driving that landscape. From that, you can then begin to ask questions, and these questions are relative to your organization's growth strategy and how your organization intends to express its power into that macro environment. Now, for context, I'll say that I wrote this paper earlier this year. This was published in a volume by Palgrave, which is a unit of Springer, focused on public affairs. And this was actually completely as a result of Craig Fleischer berating me for the last couple of years to put this stuff into something that was consumable. And the title is Using Control Factors to Translate Insight into Action. And the ideas behind this, and there's a link there if you want to read it. That's the full text. It's a quick read. It's about 12 pages, I think. It was published on the Ides of March, March 15th, 2021, which I did on purpose because I like to tempt fate that way. The central concept is the macro environment presents to you uncontrollables. And as a futurist, Eric, I know you grapple with these issues all the time. Monica, as a strategic analyst and really a human-driven strategic analyst, these are things that everyone is constantly trying to sort and grapple with. But these domains are really the domains of the uncontrollable. These are things you have to cope with as an actor in your macro environment. As you think about that, traditional competitive intelligence uses a system called KITS, key intelligence topics, in order to organize the macro environment, the stakeholders in your peer group, and then your own organization into something that's manageable and something you can ask questions about. And these are a few examples. Rather than thinking about key intelligence topics, however, I've found that it's most useful to think of it in terms of control and how you express power. And as a Stoic, my chief orientation is to limit my scope of interpretation to only those things that I can control, influence, or be forced to cope with. And so that's really where control factor theory comes from. This will be a big part of what we do on Close the Distance, is understanding how to slice and dice the dominion factors that your entity or actor or colleagues, you control together, the contingency factors, which are really the early warning topics from the KITS framework, and ultimately bound that macro environment together. and then ultimately the influence factors, which are the contingency and control factors of other actors. They're the ones who stand to win or lose, stakeholders, based upon your success or failure. And they're the ones who can help or hinder you in producing that win or loss result. So I've got a few examples here that are built in, but ultimately it's about action. Intelligence value is measured in terms of its actionability. And action is based on the three dimensions of impact, imminence, and certainty. And this is where I've sort of defined this as an action graph. This will be another construct that we'll be using in the days ahead to help us figure out what is action, what is actionable, and then how do those actions ultimately produce results. With, of course, the maxim by Dr. Drucker, Professor Drucker, that culture eats strategy for breakfast. You may come up with the most erudite and sophisticated, nuanced strategy in your peer group. But if your organization's culture is not able to execute that strategy, it's a waste of time. So we'll be doing a bit more exploration around this. Discovery is really the first stage of this insights to action translation process, which we refer to as the flow. And it's represented by this geometric shape, the chisel tip. The chisel tip, from three different perspectives, casts three different shadows. From the oblong side, it casts a circular shadow. If you move perpendicular 90 degrees, that shadow is a rectangle or a square. And if you move above that chisel tip and look down, the shadow it casts is a triangle. Reality, or truth, in other words, is the object. True statements can then be made based upon your perspective on that reality. And so based on understanding how to synthesize these perspectives, that's really where the insights to action process is made tangible. You must discover the operating environment in which you exist and your stakeholders exist. Think of this as the box or the square, so to speak. Based on that discovery, you can then optimize your response to that macro environment. This phase is known as optimality. And it begins by sacrificing all of those suboptimal choices that your organization and your co-stakeholders in destiny have arrayed before you. And then finally, the last stage is simulation. Simulation is where you put it to the test. You test it against those who might help or hinder you to see how they might act. And in a nutshell, this is what intelligence is about. This is the flow that I referred to earlier. Part of what Close the Distance will do is we're going to co-invent some new analytical products. And if you think of this as a continuum or value chain where action is made easier through each one of these stages, it begins with an estimate. And an estimate is a guess. An estimate is a guess about the future that you know is wrong. And based on how you bound your macro environment through discovery, optimize your response to that macro environment through optimality, and then test the mistakes that are inherent in your conjecture through simulation, the end result is an actionable esteem. The actionable esteem is the science fiction story written about the future, held in high regard by its co-authors. And that's who I'd like to introduce you to now, are my co-authors. And so I'm going to stop this. I'm going to just introduce myself and say, my name's Eric Johnson. I founded a company called Aurora Worldwide Development Corporation in 1995 on my 25th birthday. So you can go ahead and do the math and know that I am barely getting started with my own analytic career. I look forward to discovering together with my co-conspirators here, who I'm going to start calling provocateurs, because that's really what they are, what this macro environment looks like for 2022. And so I'll shut up from here on out. We do have a new product which Aurora is producing called Open Recon. Open Recon will be the sort of home of where Close the Distance will live. It'll be the place where you can all come in the future to join us. If you're wondering about my setting here, I'm wearing my 2018 marketing campaign t-shirt for Aurora WDC called Growth Champion. Growth Champion was our program in 2018 to suggest that competitive intelligence professionals were poorly branded and that they needed to rebrand as growth champions for the organizations they serve. Behind me here, you see my amateur agriculture projects. I believe this is my chicken coop. Here is my hop yard for beer production and whatnot. And most of it's in quite serious disrepair. But that is the lesson that I'll transition to Monica with, which was sometimes you got to give yourself permission to fail. And farming is one of those endeavors that I gave myself permission to be mostly a failure at. And I love that humility is the process of time showing you your incompetencies. And that's a big, big part of what intelligence culture is all about. So let me introduce you to my two friends, Monica and Eric. Monica, tell us about you and who you are, what you do, where you are, what you're into, and let our audience know who Monica Nixon is.
Hello, everyone. Currently, I run corporate strategy and strategic intelligence for Vanguard Integrity, not the mutual fund company, rather the cybersecurity company. Prior to that, I worked in tech intelligence for quite some time for Hewlett-Packard. And I'm actually joining you today from Sun Valley, Idaho, my sister's condo. I just came in from having coffee. I figured maybe I better jumpstart my brain, but I look forward to sharing some insights and learning from all of you, hopefully as much as I can, help you learn as well. So it's a very interesting time. Like Eric said, the world is maybe never been quite as divided, complex, and difficult to look at as what we're seeing today. And for a variety of reasons, I'm sure we're going to discuss at length. So I'm really looking forward to learning from you, and hopefully, we can all learn from each other. So thanks, Eric, for the invite.
Tremendous, Monica. Welcome. And so excited that you accepted the invitation, picked up the gauntlet, as they say, and, are willing to discover together where intelligence is headed in 2022. Mr. Garland.
Mr. Johnson. About me? It's all normal stuff here. I am a bassist turned professional bullshit detector. That's how I'm going to describe my job title from now on, or for this week at any rate. I guess technically I'm a strategic intelligence analyst, and my clients include redacted, and none of your damn business for more than 25 years. And I serve a dual role. Of course, my traditional working with private clients who I tell things they don't want to hear, and the general public who have a mix of wanting to hear what I have to say and hating what I have to say. But if it's bullshit, I'm going to find it and hopefully get on to the next level of that which is true and indicates that the common narrative is bullshit, and that can be specified on a product or a business or an entire nation state or variety of narratives out there that form the intellectual environment. And that's it. I'm a mouthy bassist.
Perfect. I expected nothing less from you, my man. And so as we sort of think about that, I'll throw out there as our opening sort of introductory topic, looking ahead into 2022, we're going to cover this sort of in sequence. We're going to go through the steepled macro environment one at a time. And just as a reminder to our audience, steepled is short for social, technological, economic, ecological, legal, political, ethical, and demographic. And as we think of those as control factors, contingency control factors, what are the things that you're most curious about in 2022 that our civilization, I'll be as broad as possible, is going to have to cope with from that macro environment? What will our civilization need to cope with from the macro environment in the year ahead? And by the way, I'll say, we're coming to you on December 21st, 2021. That's the introductory launch, re-release, I should say. We're not launched yet. We will be launching sometime in the first quarter of 2022. This re-release concept is very carefully chosen because we're inviting in a very select audience of stakeholders that I hope will broaden out into some thousands of people who will tune into these live streams and watch the artifacts recorded later. But I'll leave it there. What are you most curious about in 2022 as the contingency control factors, the uncontrollables our civilization will have to cope with?
Wow, that's a very big question. I mean, I guess where I'm sitting is, I do a lot of financial analysis. I'm going to lead right on into this one.
Yeah.
And if you kind of look at, what's been happening, and thank you, Eric, for Garland for sending me so much detail about what's happening under the surface. I think that's one of the big uncontrollables here, and how the impacts, given the leverage, what's happened with hedge funds, corporate ownership, investment, of how all this, at least somewhat appears to me, to be coming apart at the seams, and what the impacts on corporations that are stuffed with highly levered debt, and so forth, and how it's all going to play out, how it even touches the housing market. You're seeing some of that roll out now. I mean, Treasury FinCEN the other day finally conceded, in a manner of speaking, that they acknowledge that what drove so much of, say, the increase in housing, which has tremendous economic impact, being the biggest thing that people buy, on other consumptive capacities and so forth, and just, social construction, like how everything works. And you can see it's all kind of coming apart. So I wonder how all this is going to, maybe I should back up there if I didn't use the word money laundering. That's what Treasury FinCEN was, finally putting on the table a little bit, which I think most of us that were ever doing strategic analysis already had concluded some number of years ago. So how we're going to return back to economic stability, fairness, is a big backdrop that I look at, because it's clearly what we're doing now and what we've been doing subsequent to the '08 crash is wildly, wildly unstable and unsustainable. And Garland, I'm sure you have plenty to follow on that.
Well, I can always, when Monica chucks me the football, I can always run with it, right?
There's the football, Garland.
All righty. Yeah, because we talk about the housing and the money laundering. Now, this goes into if you want the soundbite, Eric, for 2022, what's going to be happening. It's going to be a global festival that's entitled "Turns Out That's Illegal."
Well said. Well said.
Or Global Prosecution Palooza. And we were already seeing, it's just warming up now. We're already seeing heads of state going down, like Jacob Zuma in South Africa going into prison. Nicolas Sarkozy, former president of France, going into the pokey, and his ministers going in for a variety of crimes. So even being that tier of society, turns out that's illegal. Go to prison. We're only warming up with that. And by way of a little recent news item, a couple days ago, the White House announced that they're setting up a National Security Council for organized crime. Not a task force, not a czar. When I read the list of who's going to be part of it, I was like, holy crap, this is like the NSC, which guards the entire nation in terms of its military threats. They're doing a parallel one that has a Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense, not just some police task forces working together. Oh, we got to get the mob guys. No, this is like a nation state level organization tied to the executive branch, parallel to our regular national security, all about taking out criminals. And of course, organized crime is not just street gangs, though those guys are still around and problematic, but also accountants, lawyers, CEOs, financiers, politicians. Organized crime means something different. And 10 years ago, actually, both President Barack Obama and the then FBI director, Robert S. Mueller III, came out with some major statements about how, organized crime was the largest threat to the United States. It was an emergency. And, I will tell you that probably has a lot to do with the fact that the Russian Federation created a brand new hybrid of a government with spy services with organized crime that all worked as one unit that formed up in the late 90s. And it's a historically important innovation, and nobody knew how to defend against it. And they made inroads in hybrid warfare and using organized crime that no one had ever seen. And it was about 2010 before people figured it out. There was a guy who defected from Russia by the name of Alexander Litvinenko, who was the head of FSB was he counterterrorism or organized crime? I forget, but he was high up at the FSB agency in Russia. He's the guy who drank the polonium tea that everyone.
I was going to say, wasn't he poisoned?
He was the guy who was poisoned because he went to the UK and Spain and told their counterintelligence people, "You guys are screwing up. I know because I'm on the winning team, and we are kicking your hindquarters right now because you got your spy guys looking at your spies, your mob guys looking at your mob, and you don't get it. It's all one thing, and that's why you're losing." And they had him poisoned. Hopefully there'll be statues to the dude eventually, because he got us, within a few years, we'd kind of figured out what the we hadn't even defined the problem yet. By 2010, 2011, you can read papers from national security universities and the Pentagon talking about the military implications of this, because they're like, this threat can flip over nation states. It can flip over corporations. This is not your great-grandfather's mafia. This is something different. And so now we're up to national infrastructure to deal with that. And, we are seeing rollbacks. We're seeing prosecutions in places for things that, you just didn't think anyone was ever going to get caught. And it's funny, the housing thing comes up with Monica, and of course, she and I have been complaining about this for, the better part of 2 decades, just constantly going, what a goddamn, and, all the magazines come out. This is why I'm a bullshit detector professionally. They're like, oh, let's do television shows about bathrooms. I was like, why do we have television shows about house flipping? That's not normal. Why do we have television shows about redesigning your bathroom? Something's wrong there. We all knew it, but none of us had thought, oh, hey, the reason that rents just doubled around here is because the prices are not increasing macroeconomically with wages or something, or, we added a new industry around town. People are hiring for it, so a house is worth a little more here. No, this is the profit from slave labor in a cotton field in Kazakhstan, somewhere in Central Asia, or in Thailand, or the profits of meth, or sex slavery being
poppy field in Afghanistan is more like it.
Oh, that's the classic, the heroin stuff is, opiates classic, but all that stuff, wherever you run that, you filter that through Switzerland and through the Caymans, and you end up buying a whole, and then you go through a bank. And so now it looks like, oh, these are financiers doing this because they didn't care where the money came from, or they knew exactly where their money came from. And all of a sudden you're paying twice as much for your house. And, that benefited certain people. But now when we finally, it's been 15, 20 years of that. Now we finally get back to, wait a minute, what was that? And when people realize on the macro side, yeah, that was illiberal regimes in other parts of the world making your apartment cost more. That was taking a bite out of your wages. And when they find out there were some regimes that had intelligence services that are like, yeah, we can use that as part of warfare. I think, that's finally, as Monica said, Treasury FinCEN finally came out and was like, yeah, the housing bubble may have actually been mob money laundering. That's the first time we're really getting the straight dope. And now us intelligence analysts have been talking about this for years, but now we get to talk about it in polite company. I can't wait for 2022. It's our year.
Yeah. In line with that, I happen to live personally, primarily in Boise, Idaho, which is by pretty much all accounts, this go rounds post 08, reinflate the bubble, the biggest increase in housing prices since forever. I got something in the mail the other day from one of the very well-known realtors, indicating housing in Boise shot up 38.5% in 1 year. Ask yourself, folks, how the biggest thing that anyone buys could possibly escalate that much in, a 12-month period.
What was the jump?
38.5, my friends, 38.5%.
In Boise.
In Boise, Idaho. And basic on-the-ground human intelligence gathering about rents is pretty much across the board. Everybody just went to see what they could get, but 33% increase all at once was not at all uncommon. Okay. So, and then the highly funny part about all that, and isn't in the midst of all this, why they're pumping all this, a realtor shows up at my door one day asking me if I wanted to sell my house. You two know me quite well. I can imagine that you can guess what I had to say to this individual. if it's so hot, why are you driving your Lexus around my neighborhood, trying to solicit people to sell houses? But, the recent intelligence in Boise, if you follow on the ground like I do, because it just stuns me and I'm kind of fascinated by the dynamic, is just in the last few months, inventories have, oh Lord, gone way up. And we all know how they play with that too, but it's still, they can't hide it. There's no more all cash offers coming in because the money dried up. And it's kind of getting fascinating. This isn't to say that there still isn't an influx of people coming in, but it's pretty clear that, the bubble has been pricked. So it's going to be watch out below in Boise, Idaho.
Well, I have a hypothesis in response to your question, Monica.
I'll bet you do.
It's on screen, actually. M2 money supply in February of 2020. So your 33% precursor, in other words, was 15.47 trillion. In October of this year, it was 21.187 trillion, roughly a 33% increase of money supply, making all of those assets, not just houses, but anything where wealth is stored, didn't go up in value because it was more productive or more valuable somehow. And that's what Eric was talking about a second ago, is about productivity. The denominator went up. The denominator got bigger, and that made the numerator bigger. And so we see this just across the board in all asset classes were inflated. Now, the question then becomes, what brings that to an end? And I think just earlier,
pick me. So what brings
Monica, please. And I'll stop my share, by the way, so that you grew your full screen here.
Okay. So we've already seen fully what happens when the Federal Reserve tries to even raise interest rates to compensate appropriately for risk by even a quarter basis point. The market dumps instantaneously, right? So you see the Fed now reversing their policy stance, right? So this is going to get very interesting because there is nowhere to go from here if you've studied economic theory, right? Which we all have.
Yep.
You pull those stops out, as you say, the money supply, great point that you made. That's what's bouncing pretty much every asset class. I don't care what it is, housing, stocks, equities, you name it, ETFs, whatever they've got in all this.
Precious metals.
Well, precious metals might be on a very different curve there, right? Because they're usually
Crypto.
the hedging.
Crypto, Bitcoin, anyone? Well, that's going to be a lot.
Right. Yeah, that as the hedge against all of that. But the Fed is really, truly boxed in. I think we all know that, okay? They've already fired what bullets they have from their gun. We've never seen all the central banks of the world engaged in simultaneous money printing, buying debt, recycling it, this, that, and the next thing. It's very interesting how these guys think that they're going to unwind this. That's a big question I have.
Right.
I think they never intended to unwind it, of course. I think
I know you think that.
they was always going to go kaplooey, and then, once they reorganized, the post-democratic society, then they would relaunch dictator coin or whatever the hell the plan was. Hey, can I just throw in a very specific example, especially for the audience that may not have tracked us through our respective long and various careers? Monica and I had some of the greatest fun when I wrote a 400-word essay about Guitar Center in 2013 about how they were junk bonds, and this is a throwaway or little chunklet of going over the Standard & Poor's report on them that Reuters put out. So this is just, like, oh, hey, look, they're a junk bond. And maybe Big Box has got some trouble. And it went viral across the industry, and the executives freaked out, and the CEO came on to my private blog on my website that I owned, and then my Facebook page with the same thing. And then they made the classic error, the one they called us journalists, and they said, how about you do some research? Yeah, I know. I know.
They called you a journalist. They didn't call me a journalist.
They called me I was a shitty journalist, and it's like, ooh, you picked the wrong bar to walk into on that one. But and how about you do some damn research on our company before you write, Mr. Smart Guy? Like, okay.
It was humorous.
So Monica and I cracked the SEC databases. Like, it's a $2 billion company with $25 million in cash before Christmas. I just, as an update, everyone else can go.
The payment on their New York property was more than their cash flow. So they chastised Eric and said he didn't know how to do financial analysis. So he passed the ball to me because I do, and so I set out there. These guys are going to be broke. And what was it, Eric? 3 to 6 months?
I thought it was 4.9 seconds, but that happened again.
That happened. So it was,
and then they went broke. That's right. Well, I just went into a Guitar Center the other day, and it looked like a hobo wouldn't even stop in there to take a dump.
Put out her coffee.
There were tumbleweeds. There was like one guitar amp, and the back door was open. The wind was going through. It was like, well, this is all going well. And they were talking about going public 2 months ago, and that is my to me it remains the emblem of private equity. And Wall Street, and going back and forth between the dumb money of, taking something public, taking something private back again, having your books out of line, and, and then, trying to rub some PR on it. Right. And because of course their people came and attacked me, and, there were articles written. This is before I got into real serious stuff with much stronger responses. But, back in the day, these little chihuahuas were nipping at me, and, for all the PR and all the credulous, oh yes, tell us more about this strategy kind of media that's out there. It's funny, you were talking about the little chisel tip and the perspective of reality. That item, that thing in the middle, is still the thing in the middle, right? You can't say it's, that's a puppy, or that's a roller coaster. No, that's whatever the thing is. That's a chisel tip, and you can look at it from a number of angles. But that don't make it a rutabaga. And, with the Guitar Center thing, it's like you just got this wonderful microcosm of, like, the bullshit universe of, like, but no, see, now we have a property in New York, which is in Times Square. So this is not going to be, well, what you might think, which is every morning we're going to wake up with a car wash bucket of $100 bills, full of $100 bills, go over to the Hudson and throw it in, and then go back to continue our day. Because we're going to try and finance the world's most expensive real estate by selling guitar picks. And never mind.
I think you mean pick notes. Pick notes.
Well,
with maturity dates of what, Eric, for the debt?
2510, 2600. You only redeem them.
We're long dead by then. Yeah.
On the Star Trek, you can redeem them on the Star Trek Enterprise, and they accrue at 13%. And if we ever take this public again and we get paid out by the dumb money, then we're going to take our 13% per year as, our just payment for having ruined a company. But meanwhile, don't worry, we're going to, it makes total sense to have a 10,000 square foot retail space in a, that sells drum sets and guitar amplifiers where there is no place to stop a car long enough to load up a guitar amplifier or a drum set. But don't worry, we've only got $1.1 billion in debt, accruing every single day on this. And this all makes sense. And if you say otherwise, shut up.
Well, plus Jerome Powell's probably going to start buying that debt any minute now, right? And that I think this scenario that played out last year, where the Federal Reserve, for the very, very first time, started buying up junk bonds essentially in order to keep the zombies from falling over, sure. And that 20% of the S&P 500 falls into that category. I think that's still the number. That was the last number I saw.
At least.
When the taper is done in February, supposedly, where's all that debt going? That's a major question, is how do they recapitalize the debt now that Fed is no longer absorbing it? And then, of course, there's the housing bonds, which is the 80 billion. The 40 billion is the corporate junk bonds. The 80 billion comes from the housing market. As that now begins to taper or ends its taper, and we still see inflation in the double digits, the inevitable rate increase. By the way, if you haven't refinanced your mortgage yet, it's probably too late. But I did last summer. The nature of how M2, ultimately, how the money supply is about to slap us silly, as both consumers as well as producers, by the way, that I think is the big well of uncertainty going into 2022. I'll even say a term that most people probably do not think of here: uncertainty. Uncertainty is a void into which you must gaze until it gazes back. And very few, like the three of us, are able to do that. We don't look away from the void. Most people can't do that. That is a skill that you develop by doing it. Uncertainty is what our stakeholders, the people we serve, ultimately have to grapple with. And that is a threshold where things get certain enough to act. And beneath that threshold, or inside of that threshold, until you've defeated that threshold of uncertainty, you are a fool to act. You're a bloody idiot if you decide to take any course of action that is still uncertain. So I am absolutely thrilled that you two are my provocateurs here to kick off Close the Distance. Are you both available tomorrow? Can we do this again tomorrow?
Absolutely, sure. Next time I'll actually not wear my pajamas.
And I'll put pants on for you, Monica.
Okay. All right.
Mr. Garland, you around tomorrow?
I'm making no promises about pants.
No pants promises, but you'll be here for Close the Distance.
Yes,
well, listen, everybody. That's it for today. Come back at 8:30 Central Time, 9:30 Eastern, 7:30 in Sun Valley. I assume you're an hour, you're on Mountain. Wherever you're at, I hope you join us again for tomorrow's live stream. We're going to start taking the cover off of the steepled macro environmental matrix and seeing what's inside it. We're going to start with social. Social is our first context for tomorrow. So, Mr. Garland, Ms. Nixon, I will see you back here in 23 hours and a little bit more. And until then, I wish you peace. And thanks for closing the distance here with me today.
Thanks for having us.
I'm going to see if I can end this thing without completely cutting us off.
Okay.
And I can't. I have to end the meeting. So
okay. Conference call here in a second. Just all three to follow up.
Sounds good. I'll call you two directly.
Okay.
All right.
Thanks.
Thanks, guys.